June 1940, Derby Carriage and Wagon Works. British engineers are welding half-inch steel plate onto 20-ton coal wagons. They are fitting First World War tank guns onto pedestals. They are armouring Victorian-era suburban locomotives built in the 1880s and 90s, machines older than many of their crew's grandfathers. The military observers watching this work think the whole thing is pointless. Armoured trains are relics. They belong to the Boer War, to the Russian Civil War, to conflicts fought before aircraft could turn any train into a burning coffin. Some senior officers reportedly dismissed the entire program as a waste of steel that could have gone to building proper tanks. He was wrong. Within weeks, 12 of these so-called pointless trains would be patrolling Britain's coastline from Cornwall to Scotland, each one carrying more firepower than any British tank in existence. They would be crewed by Royal Engineers, then by Polish soldiers who had actually fought armoured train battles against the Germans, then by Home Guard railwaymen who knew every signal box and siding on their routes. One of them, a miniature train on a 15-inch gauge tourist railway, would shoot down Luftwaffe aircraft. These forgotten weapons would patrol the coast for 4 years, waiting for an invasion that never came. This is why the pointless British armoured train was actually a stroke of desperate genius. After Dunkirk, Britain was almost naked. The army had left the bulk of its heavy equipment on French beaches: tanks, artillery, anti-tank guns, trucks. Everything that a modern army needs to fight was abandoned in the retreat. According to War Office assessments from June 1940, General Ironside had only about 170 QF 2-pounder anti-tank guns available across the entire country. The best-armed British tank of the day, the infantry tank Mark II Matilda, mounted a single 2-pounder gun and one Vickers machine gun. That was it. That was the sum total of British armoured firepower available to defend the island against a German invasion. Meanwhile, Hitler had issued Führer Directive No. 16 on July 16, 1940, formally ordering preparations for Operation Sea Lion. The plan called for 9 infantry divisions plus 2 paratrooper divisions in the initial assault. 10 more divisions would land within the first 4 days. Army Group A would advance from Kent and Sussex toward London. Army Group B would push from Dorset toward Bristol. The Wehrmacht was assembling a fleet of converted barges, coasters and motor launches across the Channel ports. General Edmund Ironside, commanding Home Forces, issued Operation Instruction No. 3 on June 25th. His strategy called for a coastal crust of defended beaches, inland anti-tank stop lines, and mobile reserves to counterattack any penetrations. The problem was that Britain had almost no mobile reserves worth the name, almost no tanks, almost no anti-tank guns, almost nothing to throw against German armour if it made it ashore. Enter the armoured train. Britain's dense coastal railway network provided something no other country possessed in quite the same way. Ready-made patrol routes requiring no road construction. A single armoured train could concentrate 2 6-pounder guns, up to 8 machine guns, and a full infantry section. That was firepower exceeding any available British tank, and it could rush along the coast to the point of an enemy landing within minutes. Construction was cheap and fast. Surplus First World War guns existed in storage. Existing locomotives could be requisitioned. Commercial wagons could be converted in weeks rather than the months needed to build tanks. Britain had done exactly this before. During the First World War, armoured trains designated HMT Norna and HMT Alice had patrolled the East Coast against potential German raids. The recipe was proven. The infrastructure existed. The question was whether anyone could build the trains fast enough. They could. Construction began in June 1940 at the Derby Carriage and Wagon Works for the LMS Railway. By late July, the first trains were operational. 12 standard gauge armoured trains, lettered A through M with "I skipped to avoid confusion," plus one extraordinary miniature train that deserves its own chapter in this story. Each standard train followed a consistent layout. An armoured locomotive sat in the centre, flanked by 2 armoured gun wagons. These were converted 20-ton steel coal wagons fitted with half-inch steel armour plate. Loopholes for rifle fire were cut into the sides, each one closed by small sliding doors. Additional goods wagons carried ammunition, stores, and troop accommodation complete with folding tables, cooking stoves, and drinking water tanks. A walkway ran along the side of the locomotive so crew could move between vehicles under fire. The motive power for most trains came from an unlikely source: the LNER Class F4 locomotive, originally built for the Great Eastern Railway between 1884 and 1909. These were Victorian-era suburban tank engines, small and manoeuvrable, designed for stopping trains at every station on the London commuter lines. They were perfect for the branch lines and secondary routes that constituted most coastal railways. Multiple F4 locomotives were armoured and allocated to the defence trains, with 15 F4s and 1 F5 loaned to the military according to LNER records. Now, before we get into the armament and combat readiness of these trains, if you are enjoying this deep dive into forgotten British military technology, consider subscribing. It takes a second, costs nothing, and helps the channel grow. Right, back to the guns. The firepower these trains carried was formidable for 1940. Each train mounted two QF 6-pounder, 600-weight Hotchkiss guns, one on a pedestal in each gun wagon. These were the same weapons fitted to Mark IV tanks during the First World War. 57mm caliber with a short barrel that proved advantageous in preventing fouling against lineside structures and bridges. They fired solid shot for the anti-tank role, with 2 guns per train across 12 trains. This represented a meaningful concentration of anti-tank firepower in an army desperately short of it. For close defence, each train carried 6 Bren light machine guns, 2 Vickers medium machine guns, and 4 Thompson submachine guns. Lee Enfield rifles for the infantry section. Boys Point 55-inch anti-tank rifles on some trains. According to East Lothian unit records, Armoured Train K initially carried approximately 14,000 rounds of mixed caliber ammunition. This was later increased to roughly 38,000 rounds. A single train could lay down devastating fire against infantry caught in the open. The crews numbered approximately 26 men per train. Royal Armoured Corps troops manned the gun wagons. Royal Engineers drove and maintained the locomotives. Railway Company civilian crews provided driving expertise on the routes they knew intimately. The trains deployed across Britain's vulnerable coastline. Train K, the best documented example, operated between Edinburgh and Berwick upon Tweed. Initially based at St Margaret's Depot in Edinburgh, the train interfered with normal railway operations and was moved to Longnidry. The crew was billeted at the Longnidry Golf Clubhouse, which proved, according to official records, quite unsuitable as accommodation. They were relocated to North Berwick within a month. Train K's patrol routes encompassed the Glencorse, Penicuik and McMurray branch lines, the West Calder, Linlithgow and Inverkeithing routes, the Waverley line to St Boswells and Peebles, the Gillane and North Berwick coastal branches. Patrols were conducted weekly, though the train maintained standing orders to transfer to Drem upon receipt of the order action stations, linking it directly to the invasion alert system. Train B was based at Alnmouth, covering the Newcastle to Berwick stretch. Train C operated around Ipswich in Suffolk. Train J patrolled the Kingdom of Fife from Stirling. Train L operated in Aberdeenshire. From Cornwall to the Moray Firth, armoured trains rumbled along branch lines that had never seen anything more threatening than a goods wagon full of turnips. In October 1940, something remarkable happened. Polish armoured train battalions were formally established within the Polish armed forces in the West. 4 battalions were created, each assigned 3 British trains. This was no random assignment. Poland had maintained armoured train battalions since the 1920s. Polish trains had fought in roughly 90 engagements against German forces during the September 1939 campaign. These men knew armoured train warfare. They had done it for real, against the same enemy now threatening Britain. The 1st Battalion took trains C, G and E. The 2nd Battalion took trains A, D and F. The 3rd Battalion took trains B, M and H. The 4th Battalion took trains K, L and J. Railway Company crews continued driving the locomotives. Polish troops manned the armoured wagons and guns. Expertise from Poland's lost campaign was now defending Britain's coast. What would these trains have fought if invasion had come? German planning called for lightly armed first-wave infantry crossing the channel on converted barges. These troops would have limited heavy weapons until the second echelon arrived. Against such forces, a train mounting 2 6-pounder guns and multiple machine guns would have been devastating. Fallschirmjäger, German paratroopers, were included in the scaled-back invasion plan. They typically jumped with only a pistol and gravity knife for safety. Heavier weapons were parachuted separately in supply canisters. Until they located and unpacked those containers, they were highly vulnerable. The trains could have caught them in the open. The critical weakness was vulnerability to air attack. The Bren guns could be elevated against low-flying aircraft, but no dedicated anti-aircraft mounts were fitted to the standard gauge trains. German armoured trains, by contrast, carried dedicated flak-veerling quad 20mm anti-aircraft wagons. The British crews understood this vulnerability clearly. According to one account, in the event of major incursion, they expected a short but merry life. The scholarly consensus, reinforced by Sandhurst war games conducted with historical starting positions and a notional invasion date of September 24, 1940, is that Operation Sea Lion would almost certainly have failed. The Royal Navy's massive superiority made sustained resupply across the Channel virtually impossible. The Luftwaffe's failure to achieve air superiority in the Battle of Britain removed a critical precondition. But in that desperate summer, with most of Britain's heavy equipment lying in French fields, the threat felt absolutely real. Now we must discuss the most extraordinary armoured train of them all. The Romney, Hythe and Dymchurch Railway was a 15-inch gauge tourist line running 13 3/4 miles across the Romney Marshes in Kent. It was a novelty railway, a toy railway for holidaymakers. The War Department requisitioned it on July 26, 1940. Locomotive number 5, the 482 Hercules, was fitted with boilerplate armour. 2 mineral wagons purchased from the Ravenglass and Eskdale Railway were armoured to serve as gun platforms. The conversion took 1 month. Crewed by 7 men of the 6th Battalion Somerset Light Infantry, this improbable war machine held what Guinness World Records recognised as the title of the world's smallest armoured train. The miniature train was armed with 2 Boys anti-tank rifles, 4 Lewis guns with 1 designated for anti-aircraft use, and nothing else. 7 men, a toy railway, the most likely invasion beach in Britain directly in front of them. According to local accounts, the train is credited with shooting down a Messerschmitt Bf 109 on October 7, 1940. The story goes that the German pilot, diving to attack what he believed was a full-sized armoured train, misjudged his altitude because of the 15-inch gauge's miniature scale and crashed. This claim should be treated as probable rather than confirmed. The train is also credited with downing a Heinkel HE 111 and possibly a Dornier DO 17, though wartime aerial victory claims were notoriously inflated across all services and nations. What is certain is that the train engaged Luftwaffe aircraft with its Lewis guns and Boys rifles, 7 men on a holiday railway shooting at the Luftwaffe. It is arguably the most perfectly British improvisation of the entire war. How did the British trains compare to what other nations were fielding? German armoured trains evolved into sophisticated standardised designs. The BP-42 featured armoured locomotives flanked by gun carriages, infantry cars, dedicated anti-aircraft wagons, and roll-on roll-off carrier cars housing a Panzer 38T tank for off-rail pursuit. Crews numbered approximately 130 men. Soviet armoured trains operated on the larger scale, fielding over 60 at the start of Barbarossa and losing 63 in the first 2 years, often fighting suicidal rearguard actions. Against these comparators, the British trains were clearly the most improvised. Armoured coal wagons with First World War guns pulled by Victorian suburban locomotives. But this was appropriate to context. Britain needed a capability in weeks, not years. The innovation lay not in the hardware but in the concept, using the world's most developed railway network as a defensive weapon system, integrating mobile firepower into an existing transportation grid with minimal cost and construction time. By 1942, the invasion threat had receded. The trains were transferred to Home Guard units composed of railway company employees, men who knew both the trains and the routes intimately. Train J went to the 5th Fife Battalion Home Guard. Train K went to the 10th City of Edinburgh Battalion Home Guard in June 1942. Train L went to the 7th Aberdeenshire Battalion Home Guard. The progression from regular soldiers to exiled Allied troops to part-time civilian volunteers mirrors the gradual diminution of the invasion threat itself. English trains were phased out by July 1943. The 3 Scottish trains lasted longer. Scottish Command argued they remained important for coastal defence, and that the crews demonstrated considerable interest in their work. The end came prosaically. In September 1944, LNER informed the War Office that locomotive number 7573 Train K was due for its 5-yearly boiler examination and requested its release. This administrative trigger forced the question of whether the train served any remaining purpose. On November 5, 1944, the Railway Executive Committee was informed of the War Office decision to withdraw all remaining armoured trains. By month's end, the last British armoured train had ceased operations. The locomotives were returned to their railway companies and reverted to civilian service. The LNER F4 tanks were fitted with commemorative brass plaques reading LNER. During the war of 1939 to 1945, this locomotive was armoured and hauled defence trains on coastlines. The armoured wagons were stripped and scrapped. The last F4 locomotive was withdrawn from service in June 1956. None survived into preservation. Today, a 6-pounder gun wagon and related components survive in museum collections. The Tank Museum at Bovington holds an example, one of the few surviving pieces of a standard-gauge British Second World War armoured train. In June 1940, Britain had almost nothing. Its engineers and railwaymen built something from nothing and built it fast. They turned the island's greatest peacetime asset, its railway network, into a weapon of war within weeks. The trains were crewed by Royal Engineers who maintained them. Polish exiles who brought hard-won expertise from their own lost campaign. Home Guard railwaymen who knew every signal box and siding. The miniature train on the Romney Marshes, 7 men with Lewis guns on a holiday railway, remains arguably the most perfectly British improvisation of the entire war. That these trains never fired a shot in anger against an invading enemy is beside the point. They were ready. And in the summer of 1940, being ready was everything. If you enjoyed this video,